Well everyone, 2024 has come to an end, and with it, another year of gaming that, while it probably didn't have month after month of juggernaut releases like we saw in 2023, there were some outstanding games that came out that, at least for me, I enjoyed just as much as any of those from last year, and really that kind of sums up 2024 for me. It was a year where I enjoyed every game across the board I played as a whole, a lot more compared to last year, and that's because of a variety of reasons I'll get into in this video, which I should say now also. As someone who chooses to review games, I'm glad I decided to go back over every game I played, because I am curious to see if I still feel the same way about a game as I did when I reviewed it. Was I too nice about a game? Could I have been harsher? Did my reviews suck? And so on. Not to mention, I can hopefully shine a light on some games that maybe you overlooked or never heard of. With that said, there are a lot of games I'll be covering in this video, so I'll try not to rant too long on any single game, and also at the end of this video, I'll share what stands at the mountaintop of all of these games as my game of the year, and I have a feeling it might surprise a lot of you. But now, let's get into the meat of this video with the long list of games I played, starting with what I consider to be the most underrated game of 2024, Withering Rooms. A game that really just surprised me in so many ways, and one I just can't recommend enough. But what is this game? Well, smash together Dark Souls abstract design and storytelling, mix in some Silent Hill and Clock Tower aesthetics, throw in a dash of addicting roguelike gameplay, and you have a horror RPG experience that is truly unique, which what probably surprised me the most was how good that gameplay actually was. The way you use the environment to sneak and engage with enemies really was so much fun to me. Plus, the wide variety of weapons you use to battle enemies as well really kept the gameplay fresh for the 40 plus hours that you could easily get out of the game. You have access to guns, melee weapons, spells, hell, you even have a camera to fight ghosts, and the list goes on. It is a strange, one-of-a-kind experience. My only real issue with the game was how flat the level design is. You're basically just moving from square room to square room, but outside of that, I really didn't have any issues, unlike Nintendo, who was not happy with this next game. So, Palworld took the world by storm when it released back in January, which already feels like an eternity ago, but when I first saw this game, I really thought it wasn't real. It just looked like a strange abomination of what it would look like if you could play as actual poachers in the Pokemon world. In reality, it's just a really fun monster catching base building survival game, and what really made the gameplay loop fun for me was how the different pals could help you in your daily activities at the base you built. It really took a formula about what can this monster do for me in battle to what can it also do for me. Plus, just being able to actually battle alongside pals in combat really adds a cool dynamic to the gameplay. Not to mention the endless settings you can play with to customize that experience, though with that said, I still wish there was more to the actual game. Even after all the updates, the game's general open world can feel pretty empty at times still, and I wish I conveyed this feeling more in my review. It's probably the one video this year I wish I could go back and redo to explain my points better, because I just simply did a poor job of doing it, but luckily this next game, I had no problem explaining how I felt. Metaphor is easily one of my favorite games I played this year, and the biggest reason for that was the story. Not to take anything away from the actual gameplay systems, the turn-based battles, archetype system, and managing your daily tasks was well done, but when it came to the story, I loved everything about it. The cast felt dynamic in their personalities and goals. Luis truly felt like a villain that I not only didn't hate, but enjoyed every second he was on the screen. The only real downside Metaphor had for me, outside of some nitpicking, was the enemy variety and dungeon layouts. They felt pretty repetitive at times. It could have used a little more flair to them. Despite that though, this is still a game I highly recommend to anyone who has a spare 80 hours. Though when it comes to Hellblade 2, you only need a good 6 to 10 hours for this cinematic experience, which for some would make the game bad. For me personally, I think this is such a stupid statement. A game should never be judged based on its length. It should be based on the quality of the experience that it delivers, and it's crazy the length some people go to downplay a game based on how long it is. Now, if you want to argue how much that experience should cost, I can get behind that, but when it comes to length, I'll never call a game bad based on that. I'll judge it on the experience it delivers, and Hellblade 2 was just straight up disappointing for me. I loved the first game and was super excited to see we were getting a sequel, but Hellblade 2 just didn't feel like an evolution of the first game at all. it felt more like a lateral. Instead of enhancing the gameplay and cinematics, they basically stagnated and in some ways went backwards with the gameplay while taking leaps in the cinematic side of things, which led to it just not being a great video game experience for me. But on the flip side, what was a great video game experience for me was Crow Country, a game I wish I would have done a full video review on and not just a short. This interesting little indie survival horror game is one of the coolest games I played this year. It follows Mara Forrest, who has to explore this abandoned theme park full of these grotesque creatures known as guests. And between the puzzles and gameplay style that strongly reminded me of using a Nintendo Wii controller, you will not be wasting your time with this experience. Not to mention my biggest complaint of the game was resolved, which was the difficulty. I felt the game was a little too easy, didn't have that hardcore survival horror experience at release, but they updated the game adding in that type of experience with a harder difficulty to add that challenge, and just elevating the game to an even higher level for me, which is something I wish Dragon's Dogma 2 would have done over the first game. Even though I really enjoyed my time with it, Dragon's Dogma 2 kinda gave me that same feeling as Hellblade 2. It never really felt like a sequel, it felt more like an add-on. It was just more Dragon's Dogma, which I'm not against, but there were so many areas this game needed to be better at. The enemy variety was very poor for the size of the world, the story was just plain awful, and the endgame had just an empty feeling to it. Never really felt rewarding, which is a shame, because the gameplay was an absolute blast, and the Sphinx questline was one of my favorite experiences in a video game this year. It really captured that kind of obscure weirdness you can only get as an experience when playing a video game. So if we ever get a Dragon's Dogma 3, I hope they lean into that weirdness a little more between all the awesome combat to really make an experience that stands out like swarms of enemies coming from every direction to take down democracy, which is what Helldivers 2 is all about. Fighting alongside your friends as you take on endless waves of enemies in the name of Super Earth. Now this game I feel is really like a coin, where you can play solo and have your moments of fun. It really is a game that excels most when playing in a group. The way you can interact and work together with other people really is what makes this experience so special, and without it, I believe the game wouldn't have been as big as it was, though I'm glad it was, because I feel at the start of the year, between Palworld and Helldivers 2, it really made the statement to the game industry reminding them that you don't need a giant budget to make a good game. You just need a concept that is fun to play, and people will show up, which I believe is a similar statement Astro Bot made as well. With it winning Game of the Year at the Game Awards, a lot of people were shocked. How could a game like this win over games such as Rebirth or Black Myth Wukong? While I wouldn't have voted for it myself if I was on a panel, I get it. After playing Astro Bot, it really reminded me of why video games became popular in the first place. Gameplay. While better graphics, art direction, voice acting, and a good story can elevate a game to new heights, there's something about a flawless, pure gameplay experience that is just about fun that is hard to match when done right, which is what Astro Bot did. Outside of being the biggest advertisement campaign ever for Sony in video game form, from a gameplay and performance perspective, you couldn't ask for a better experience, even with it being on the easier side, which is the exact opposite feeling I got when playing Suicide Squad. This game sits squarely above all as the worst game I played this year, and it honestly changed my perspective on how I chose games to review from that point on. Because you see, as I entered my second year reviewing games on the channel, I was really battling on whether I should keep reviewing games I think would perform better, or keep reviewing games I as a person cared about more, and the choice to review this game was done because of the discourse around the game. I wanted to see if it was really as bad as I heard, not because I was interested in playing it, which is not the best reason to go into a game. I really try to have this honest conversation with all of you when I review games. I'm not trying to act like I'm some professional reviewer who has all the answers. I'm just another average Joe who sees a trailer of a game that if it looks cool, I'll play it and give my thoughts on it. And I feel when I do that, it's just a much more honest and enjoyable experience for both me and all of you. Plus, I dropped Grand Blue Fantasy Relink to play Suicide Squad, a game I was having immense fun with and was originally going to review before basically letting my greedy thoughts take over. So I'm just simply never going to do that again. I'm only reviewing games I want to review, and that's what I've done since that video, and it's also why I said I enjoyed games more this year than last year overall. But to get back to Suicide Squad, the game was such an unforgettable experience in almost every aspect, and honestly, I wasn't harsh enough on it. This didn't seem like it lived up to the quality of the famous Rocksteady I heard so much about, since this was the first game I have ever played from them. Luckily enough, From Software always seems to nail my expectations, if not surpass them. Which is exactly what Shadow of the Erdtree did for me. It gave me everything I wanted from an Elden Ring DLC, from the world design having this deceiving vertical layout, some of the most challenging bosses in the series, and awesome new items to play around with. I absolutely loved every second I played Shadow of the Erdtree. The only part I wasn't a fan of was how they handled leveling in the DLC with these Shadow Tree fragments. It's great on an initial playthrough, but gets to feeling tedious or annoying on repeated playthroughs. But if that's my biggest complaint about a DLC, I don't think it's doing too bad. Though as a DLC, did it deserve to be nominated for Game of the Year? Well, I'm pretty mixed on this, and it deserves a video of its own to explain how I fully feel about it, because it is a very nuanced conversation that is hard for people to agree on. Though what people did seem to agree on was that my review on the Plucky Squire was not the best. Mainly because I was one of the few people who did not like the game, but my reasons for not liking the game was more about how it was so hand-holding through the entire game. It constantly interrupted the gameplay to tell you things you didn't need told. This led to what should have been a really cool experience to feeling like I could just never really get into the flow of the gameplay, which I did find very fun, though I do want to say that the devs did update the game with a brand new streamlined mode that cuts down on a lot of what I disliked about the game to make it a more gameplay focused experience. And after diving into the game for a few hours to check this out, it is definitely a lot better, and if this would have been like this from the start, I believe my sentiment of the game would have been a lot more positive. Also, real quick, some were not happy with my title for the video. I'll say this about that. When I make titles for these videos, I never think about if it's a good or bad title, positive or negative. I just think, does this convey how I feel about the game, and does it match the contents of the video? That's about it, which I don't think any title did a better job of that than the one I had for a small indie game made by a single dev called Despair Blood Curse. Now, I kind of felt bad about this review if I'm being honest. Not because I believe I did a bad job with it, but because this was the first time I got a review code early to review a game, and I kind of shit on the game. I basically said this game was so bad it was good, which hey, I'm never not going to be honest about a game I play whether I get it for free or not. I don't care if devs like me or not, I just want all of you who take the time to watch my videos to know they are getting an honest review, whether you agree or disagree with what I have to say. Now to get back to Despair Blood Curse, despite bashing the game, I did have a good time with it. There is something about janky survival horror games that I will just never not have fun with. If you are a fan of those kind of games, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't have fun with this one either. Which my biggest complaint with the game was the enemies. They were just not good. The AI was bad, and they all felt exactly the same to fight basically. And to be fair, since I made that review, the dev has updated a few things with enemies, controls, and a new difficulty that does make the game a little bit better, which while we're talking about games getting better, one I'm looking forward to seeing evolve in the future is Crystal Story Dawn of Dusk. Another indie game made by a single dev, but this one has a very retro style that really reminds me of many other games in so many ways, from its overworld combat feeling like it's straight out of a classic Zelda game, and its interesting Undertale style boss battles. Crystal Story is a game I very much enjoyed. It's a game that's actually not finished yet. Bread Frown, the one working on this game, has more content on the way, which while these updates come slow, from what he has as the foundation for this game, it could be something really special once the project is complete. So I do recommend keeping an eye on this one as it continues to be developed, because sometimes it can be hard to see what the end result may be for a game. And I don't think any game represents that more this year than the Silent Hill 2 remake. This is a remake I never thought we would see, and if we ever did, I really thought it would turn out terrible. With Bloober Team's rocky game development history and marketing not quite giving off the best vibes, this really seemed like it was going to be a clear miss, but it actually turned out to be a pretty impressive remake. The visuals, sound design, and just overall atmosphere did a good job capturing that Silent Hill feeling. Plus the combat felt much improved compared to the original. even if that combat somewhat overstays its welcome with how long the runtime has been extended. With that said, I'm not going to sit here and say it's better than the original, but I do believe this is a step in the right direction on bringing what is one of the most storied horror franchises out there back to the spotlight, and continue to inspire others to create their own horror experiences. Like with Hollowbody, another indie game that was created by a single dev who was inspired by the Silent Hill games, and this was a game I was super excited about. After playing the demo earlier this year, I couldn't wait to see what the full experience was like. Unfortunately, that experience ended up being a very disappointing one for me, to the point I couldn't bring myself to do a full review on the game. The reason for this is because while I can't deny that the game's story concept and atmosphere are amazing, the gameplay is just not very good. The puzzles are wildly underwhelming, and the game just had a very unfinished feel to it, though I will say that the dev has got some updates out that help with some of the stuff. But overall, it's a game that I just can't recommend to anyone who isn't at the very least a Silent Hill or survival horror fan. But Echoes of the Living, on the other hand, is a game I can safely say everyone should have their eyes on. I've done 3 videos on this game now, and the devs over at Moonglint, who happen to actually be a couple who dropped everything to basically work on this passion project, inspired by the classic Resident Evil games, probably understand what makes a survival horror game better than just about anyone else. The attention to detail from the camera angles, puzzles, atmosphere, and so on are just so damn impressive. It's been really cool watching the evolution of this game over time, and I'm really hoping the full release is exactly what I believe it will be, one of the best survival horror experiences in the last 20 years. Obviously, I won't truly judge the game till it fully releases and I get my hands on it, but everything I've seen and played so far tells me this is going to be a very good game, kind of like this small little title called Black Myth Wukong. A game that really found ways to stand out that I would have never expected that go beyond just good combat. I say this because as someone who has played games like Devil May Cry and Ninja Gaiden, the actual combat, while very good, doesn't stand out to me in a way it might for others, but what stood out to me the most was everything else that enhanced that experience. The art direction, cutscenes, boss designs, and the gameplay systems around the combat, like being able to respect for free, is what really elevated this experience for me. Heck, even as someone who has never been interested in learning about Journey to the West, this game actually made me go learn about it, and now I plan to sit down and read the entire story, which is just a testament to how well this game was made. I just wish I could say the same for Zelda's first adventure. Echoes of Wisdom overall as a game was very fun for me. The creativity you had with the various echoes allowed for you to truly solve situations in such a vast number of ways. It kept the gameplay interesting through the entire game. The only downside was this system was not handled very well. Selecting echoes could be a pain, and at times it never felt like they really trusted this gameplay choice, thanks to them adding in the sword fighter form to basically make the game play like any other Zelda game. Honestly, they probably would have been better off going with a Kirby-like approach where Zelda herself transformed, giving you control of these different echoes so you as the player could feel more engaged in the combat and puzzle solving. Though the biggest crime was probably the horrific performance this game suffers from at times. You could really feel the age of the Switch with this one, unlike Eve, who will internally look like a goddess in Stellar Blade. Jokes aside, Stellar Blade is another one of those games that I really thought wasn't going to be very good, but after 100% in the game, it was one of my favorite experiences of the year. The combat was actually really good. I had a blast dodging and parrying away at enemies and bosses to what was one of my favorite gaming soundtracks of the year, plus it had fishing, and I love a good fishing minigame. Not to mention, unlike others, I didn't think the characters' designs didn't clash with the world. They are machines. They should look out of place in the world, just like in real life, how machines can look very uncanny valley. But what kind of let me down a little bit with the game was how some sections of the game were basically copy and pasted. Same with some bosses. I feel when a game is a shorter experience, it's really important to try and not have that. At the same time, it can just be as important to keep experiences interesting in longer games as well, like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This was such an awesome experience. It has what might be my favorite combat in any Final Fantasy game, and it has what is my favorite minigame in any game ever with Queen's Blood. This card game is so damn addicting, and I loved every second playing it. Which, speaking of minigames, Rebirth had a lot of them, and I kind of docked it for having so many, which to a certain extent might have been a little unfair, because in reality, you don't have to touch 99% of them to actually beat the main game. But even still, it's crazy how much stuff is locked behind completing minigames. So at least on that front, I do think it can be overwhelming at times. Also, the open world activities could get pretty repetitive at times, like I don't need towers in my Final Fantasy game like it's Assassin's Creed, but besides that, this game has it all. The soundtrack, boss fights, voice acting, gameplay, just pretty much everything else is top tier, and I can't wait to see what they do with Part 3. Kind of like how I'm endlessly waiting to get a remake for what is one of the worst games I've played but love, Bullet Witch. This game has aged so poorly, but I still had a blast revisiting it. From the oddly game-defining physics and the iconic gun blast and gun rod, this game is truly a relic of its time, and its strange development history matches that. Add in some really iconic voice actors, and you have an experience that can only be described as what the hell was that? Unlike Parasite Eve, a game that honestly to this day I consider underrated. It has such a fun combat system, and the setting for the game really is a standout among RPGs of that time. Now if we could just get a sequel or reboot somehow that honors that unique gameplay, I would be beyond happy. But besides that, I had a blast revisiting these two games in retrospectives, and I'm looking forward to diving into more older games in the future, kinda like how I'm excited to dive into Rubinite whenever it releases. I came across the demo for this game one day out of boredom, looking for something to play or see if there was anything I might be interested in, and man did this game surprise me. While the demo is very short, the gameplay instantly hooked me, with a fast-paced hack-and-slash style combat that uses this focus system to spice up things against bosses based on your distance from them. It felt very engaging and rewarding. Now I can't say much on the story, but it seems like a very interesting world, and the art style is pretty sick with its sprite work. So I'm excited to see what the final game is like, just like I was excited to see what Dungeons of Hinterberg was like. Now, I wouldn't label myself as a cozy game person. I mean, my idea of a cozy game is trying to fist Radon to death in Elden Ring, but what drawn me into Dungeons of Hinterberg was the way the dungeons looked. They just had a very Zelda-esque look to me, and sure enough, they felt like Zelda dungeons. Yeah, maybe they didn't have quite the complexity of a lot of the Zelda dungeons, but each one felt different, and with how each area of the game had its own theme around spells, it made reaching a new area that much more enjoyable, since you knew that you were about to experience a completely new design approach around those spells. Then of course, you have all the in-between stuff with building bonds with characters and prepping for the next dungeon that I ended up enjoying thanks to the game's gameplay loop just being done really well. Also added some nice content drops since I last played the game. It's a game I would easily recommend. Which is something I wish I could say with the Final Fantasy XVI Rising Tide DLC. This expansion ended up feeling really flat for me, despite having some awesome boss fights and new gameplay additions that added some good replayability to the game overall. It really just felt like Clive was alone in this journey with how little Jill and Joshua played a part. I really wish they would have done more in the story, and I also wish the DLC tied into the main story in a meaningful way. But overall, I enjoyed my time with it, and if you're a fan of Final Fantasy XVI, I see no reason why you wouldn't enjoy it either. Though there are times where you wouldn't think you would enjoy a game, but then you do. I say this because while I was waiting for Path of Exile 2 to release into early access, I decided to jump into Infinity Nikki, a game that I started off playing as a joke to kill time, but ended up enjoying quite a bit. Like, I almost made a review for this game. I was enjoying it that much. I found the various gameplay aspects from the platforming to the minigames to be pretty good, and the story in general was definitely different. But ultimately, the second I started playing Path of Exile 2, I was hooked, and nothing else mattered. Even now, I'm trying to pretend the game doesn't exist so I can get this video done. That's how much fun I'm having playing it right now. Which, since I just got done doing a video on it, I don't have much to add here, but I will say there are some issues I have with the game that I didn't experience when I did the video, which is why I plan to do a review on it down the road, and that's something that happens when playing a game. Everything can seem great at first, but cracks can start to show the more you play. Which is what happened with Gestalt, Steam, and Cinder for me. As someone who grew up playing Mega Man games, this game caught my eyes instantly. It looked like it captured that experience perfectly, but in reality, as I played through the game, there were some definite pitfalls to the game. While the art direction, level design, gameplay mechanics, and music all fit the bill, the boss fights were very disappointing for me. When you make your way through these kind of games, there's something about reaching the end of an area to fight an epic boss fight that really makes all the effort worth it. And this game just didn't have that for me, which is a shame because the gameplay is very good in this game. I just don't know if I could recommend it outside of picking it up on sale. But with all that said, that covers every game I played this year, and I'm glad I could share these experiences with all of you. I'm not perfect as a game reviewer, and I never want to be. I'm just here to be some random guy who shares his opinions on the various games he plays, and I hope all of you do the same in return. Whether you agree or disagree with me, love or hate my content, I always look forward to seeing how all of you feel about the games I talk about, though the question is, which of these games is my game of the year? Well, that's easy. Actually, it wasn't, and I hate choosing stuff like this because I feel like I could flip-flop on it at any given time. Because, man, I really loved basically everything about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but I also immensely loved the cast and turn-based combat of Metaphor. But if I'm going to plant my flag down on a single game, then I'm copping out with Withering Rooms as my indie game of the year, because it's pretty much a tie for me between Metaphor and Final Fantasy, and these games get enough attention as is. Everyone knows they are good games that are worthy of Game of the Year, which is why I'm picking Withering Rooms. It really is a strange, interesting game that absolutely surprised me more than any other game this year, and I really believe more people need to check it out. Also, to round out my top 5 games with those 3 would be Black Myth Wukong, another game that is easily worthy of the Game of the Year title, and Stellar Blade, a game that I just simply had a blast playing. But that about wraps this video up. 2025 is upon us, and it's shaping up to be an absolute insane year of gaming releases that I can't wait to dive into, which is a journey I hope all of you join me on.